Hey there, deep divers. You ever get that feeling that like things are just way more complex than they seem?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Like maybe how happy you are at work isn't just about, you, but about your team too.
Uh-huh.
And maybe even the whole company culture.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today.
Okay, cool.
These we call them cross-level interactions.
Catchy.
So get ready to unpack how like all these different layers of our world from like us as people, to teams, to like entire companies,
Hmm.
all kind of connect in these really surprising ways.
Yeah, it's like those Russian nesting dolls,
Right.
but with data.
Exactly. And we have an awesome guide for this.
Oh, cool.
A 2013 article by Herman Guinness,
Guinness.
like the beer,
Okay.
Gottfredson and Culpepper from the Journal of Management.
Sound like a good group.
Yeah, they lay out some really, really useful best practices for researchers who are studying these really tricky interactions.
Okay.
And we're going to break it all down for you.
All right, I'm ready.
So think of it like this.
Okay.
You've probably heard that having a good relationship with your boss, what researchers call LMX,
Right, LMX. Yeah.
is linked to, feeling more empowered at work.
Yeah, makes sense.
But what if I told you that the overall leadership climate, like in your team,
Uh-huh.
can actually change how strong that link is?
Oh, wow.
Who's
So,
that?
so like even if I have a great relationship with my boss,
Uh-huh.
if the whole team is negative, I might not feel as empowered.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so that's why you got to go beyond just looking at like relationships between two people.
Okay.
We need to think about how all these higher level factors,
Right.
like, team climate or like organizational culture,
Okay.
all come into play.
Yeah.
And that is where multi-level modeling comes in.
Multi-level modeling. Okay.
Yeah, it helps researchers like untangle all these different layers and see how they all, interact.
So it kind of like sorts everything out.
Exactly.
Makes it easier to understand.
Okay, so I'm starting to see why this is such a powerful tool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But how do we even know if we need to use it?
That's a great question.
Yeah, like couldn't we just, keep it simple?
Well, that's where the interclass correlation comes in, or ICC.
ICC.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Imagine you randomly picked a coworker from your company.
Okay.
How likely is it that they would have a similar level of empowerment as you? I don't know. It depends on the coworker, I guess.
Right. But if the chances are high, then maybe individual differences are all that really matter.
Okay.
But if there are big differences between teams in terms of empowerment, that's a sign that like the team level is playing a role.
Uh-huh.
And a multi-level model is probably the way to go.
So it's kind of like saying, hey, the team you're on really matters.
Exactly. And if the ICC is high, meaning there's a lot of variation between teams, then researchers can start building a multi-level model.
To figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk me through this model building process.
Okay.
Like what are the main steps?
Well, imagine it like constructing a building. You start with like a foundation,
Yeah.
and then you add all these layers of complexity.
Uh-huh.
So in multi-level modeling, the foundation is what's called the null model.
The null model.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of ominous.
Oh, no, it's actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
The null model just looks at the overall variation in like our outcome variable,
Okay.
which in this case is empowerment
Okay.
across all the teams.
Gotcha.
So we're basically asking, are some teams just, generally more empowered than others,
Okay.
even before we consider any like individual or team level factors?
So we're kind of setting a baseline.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So what happens next?
Well, that's where we start adding the layers.
Uh-huh.
So the next step is to bring in our individual level predictor,
Okay.
which in our example is LMX.
Right.
Now, this is where things can get a little technical, but stick with me. We start with what's called a random intercept and fixed slope model.
Random intercept and fixed slope.
Yeah.
You're losing me a little bit.
Okay, imagine it like this.
Okay.
We're acknowledging that different teams might have different starting points for empowerment.
Okay.
Maybe some teams just, have a more positive vibe overall.
Uh-huh.
That's the random intercept part.
Okay.
But for now, we're assuming that the relationship between LMX and empowerment,
Right.
the slope of that line,
Uh-huh.
is the same across all teams.
Okay.
Think of it as a fixed rate of return.
Okay.
So for every unit increase in LMX,
Yeah.
empowerment goes up by the same amount no matter what team you're on.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we're saying, okay, we get that some teams have a head start,
Uh-huh.
but like we're assuming that having a good relationship with your boss has like the same positive effect
Right.
on, feeling empowered,
Yeah,
regardless of what team you're on.
exactly. That's the assumption we test in this step of the model.
Okay.
So what if that assumption isn't right?
Good question.
What if the relationship between LMX and empowerment IS different depending on the team?
Yeah, what then?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Ooh, I like interesting.
But you'll have to wait to hear about that.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, you'll have to stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, fine, but I'm going to be thinking about it the whole time.
I know you are.
I'm really curious now.
I bet you are.
All right, we'll be right back.
Okay. Welcome back, deep divers. So before the break, we were really getting into the weeds with multi-level modeling.
Yeah, all those levels.
All those levels, right? And exploring how, factors at different levels can interact in these super interesting ways.
Yeah, and you were about to explain what happens when that relationship between LMX and empowerment isn't the same across all the teams.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when we move to step 3 of this whole model building thing.
Okay.
Instead of assuming a fixed slope, we allow for random slopes.
Random slopes. Okay,
So we're saying that the relationship between LMX and empowerment might actually be stronger in some teams and weaker in others.
Okay, so in some teams, having an awesome relationship with your boss might make a huge difference in how empowered you feel.
Yeah.
But in other teams,
Yeah.
it might not matter as much.
Exactly. And that's where centering comes in.
Centering.
Yeah.
Like centering yourself.
Well, kind of. Remember that tree analogy from before?
Yeah, with the measuring.
Yeah, we need to make sure we're measuring everything from the same place.
Oh, right.
Otherwise, things can get kind of messed up.
Right, we got to make sure everyone's measuring tree height from the ground.
Yeah.
Not from their belly button or something.
Exactly. But we have 2 types of centering.
2. Oh, boy.
Yeah, grand mean and group mean.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Okay, so grand mean centering is when we're comparing everyone to the average across the whole company.
The whole company.
The group mean centering is comparing you to the average within your specific team. Oh, okay, so it's like how my LMX compares to my teammates.
Right.
Not to just everyone in the company.
You got it. And when we're studying cross-level interactions, group mean centering is usually better.
Okay.
Because it focuses on what's happening within each team.
So it's saying, okay, we want to know how much better or worse your relationship with your boss is compared to your teammates.
Right.
Not just to everyone in the company.
Exactly. Now, once we've built our model, we need to see if these differences in the LMX empowerment relationship across the different teams are actually meaningful.
Okay, how do we do that?
That's where researchers look for statistical significance.
Okay. But there's always a but.
There's always a but, right. We can't stop at just statistical significance.
Okay, why not?
We need to think about practical significance, too.
Practical significance.
Yeah. So just because something is statistically significant doesn't mean it actually matters in the real world. Oh, right. A tiny effect might be statistically significant if we have a ton of data.
Exactly.
But it might not make a real difference.
Right. So that's why Guinness and his colleagues recommend looking at the proportion of variance explained.
Okay.
So in our example, we might ask what percentage of the differences in the LMX empowerment relationship across teams is because of leadership climate.
So that tells us how much power leadership climate has in shaping those individual relationships.
Exactly. We want to know if it's a small player or a big one.
Right. Makes sense.
And once we know that, we can see the real-world implications of these cross-level interactions.
It's all of a sudden we can see those hidden connections.
Yeah.
How the team atmosphere can either, boost or weaken the impact of your relationship with your boss.
And that brings us to step 4, the grand finale. The cross-level interaction model.
Ooh, fancy.
Right. So here we bring in our higher-level variable.
Which is?
In this case, it's leadership climate. And we see how it interacts with our individual level variables.
Okay, so this is where we see if leadership climate can explain those differences in the LMX empowerment relationship that we saw.
Across all the teams, yeah.
Exactly. This is getting good.
Right. So maybe teams with really strong leadership climates have stronger LMX empowerment relationships. And teams with weaker climates have weaker relationships.
Okay.
That's what we test in this last step.
This is so cool. We're seeing how it all fits together.
Oh, right.
Could we take this even further?
What do you mean?
Could we look at interactions across more than 2 levels?
So you're thinking big. Yes, we can go deeper.
Ooh, deeper.
Yeah, imagine adding another layer to our model.
Okay.
Organizational culture.
Ooh.
So now we're looking at individuals nested in teams,
Yeah.
nested in organizations.
That's a lot.
It is. And to be honest, even with all this talk about models and stats,
Yeah.
sometimes the best way to really get it is to see it.
You mean like a graph?
Exactly. A good graph can really bring these interactions to life.
Way better than like staring at numbers.
Absolutely. And the authors of our article actually have a great example graph.
Oh, cool.
They show how the relationship between LMX and empowerment literally changes shape.
Oh, wow.
Depending on the team's leadership climate.
So we're not just talking about like abstract ideas.
Right.
We're talking about stuff that can really affect how people experience their work.
Exactly. That's what makes multi-level modeling so powerful.
Yeah, it helps us understand all this complex stuff that shapes our lives.
Right. But before we go too far, let's take a step back
Okay.
and think about some of the challenges of this approach.
Okay, good point.
Yeah. So stay tuned for the last part of our deep dive where we'll wrap things up with something to really think about.
Okay, and we're back for the last part of our deep dive into cross-level interactions. Before we left off, we were talking about modeling those interactions across like 3 whole levels, individuals, teams, and organizations.
It's like adding another whole dimension
Right.
to how we understand the workplace.
Yeah, like suddenly we're not just thinking about my relationship with my boss
Right.
and our team climate,
Yeah.
but also how the whole company culture plays into it all.
It gets complicated.
It does. So can we even wrap our heads around all that?
Well, that's where multi-level modeling is so helpful.
Okay.
It gives us the tools to really break down these relationships and see how they're all connected.
So even though it's even more, it depends.
Yeah.
We're still using those same model building steps.
Exactly. Like starting with that null model. And adding complexity.
Okay, and centering those variables is still important.
Oh, yeah, even more so.
Okay.
Because we have more levels.
Right, we got to make sure we're comparing the right things.
Yeah, apples to apples.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I bet studying these 3-level interactions takes a ton of data.
You're telling me Guinness and his colleagues say we need a way bigger sample size.
Oh, really?
To have enough power to find those 3-way interactions.
Statistical
power rating. We need enough organizations and teams and people to capture all that variation.
So it's like we're adding another layer of it depends.
Exactly.
So we need more data to tease it all apart.
Right.
Sounds tough.
It can be. And to be honest, we don't have all the tools yet.
Oh, really?
To totally nail these really complex models.
Right.
There isn't a specific power calculator for 3-level interactions.
Oh, wow.
But the good news is that research is always moving forward.
Yeah, that's true.
And new methods are coming out all the time.
That's good to hear.
So even though we can't dive too deep into those 3-level models today, it's cool to know that those tools are being developed.
It is. But even sticking with the 2-level interactions, I'm realizing that even small effects can have a big impact in the real world.
Absolutely. Guinness and his colleagues really stress that practical significance is key. So even a small change in that LMX empowerment relationship, depending on the leadership climate, can make a real difference in how people feel at work.
It's like that butterfly effect thing.
Totally.
One little change can have a ripple effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why these cross-level interactions are so important.
Yeah.
They're happening all around us, shaping our experiences in ways we might not even see.
This has been a really cool deep dive.
I agree.
I feel like I have a whole new way of looking at how people, teams, and organizations all work together.
Me too. It's been fun exploring this stuff with you.
And with you, our awesome listeners. We hope this deep dive has got you thinking about those hidden interactions in your own world.
Yeah, what cross-level interactions are happening in your workplace?
Ooh, good question.
How does your company culture affect the relationship between what you're good at and your team's success?
It makes you think.
It does. Keep an eye out for these kinds of relationships. They're everywhere.
And if you want to go even deeper, check out that article by Guinness and his colleagues.
Yeah, it's got even more details and advice for everyone.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today's deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time for another exploration of some really cool research.
See ya.
Until then, stay curious.